Hello, how are you doing? Welcome to the stream. I realize it's been a while. Hello, Indie Gamiacs. How are you doing? Good evening. We're gonna record a podcast tonight, and I'm off to bed. I'm tired. I've been working a lot. That's also why I haven't been streaming. Yeah. Things are just happening. Anyway, I need to. Just realized I need to figure something out here because I think for some reason I did some other projects and I changed my audio around, which is a bit of like my audio setup, which is a bit of a problem. So now we have to test everything again. That works. We're gonna do a test recording. I mean, might as well get that out of the way as well. Alright, so that works. Question is, what happens if I do this? That works as well. I think you can hear that, right? Because I can see that on OBS, so that should be fine. I need more of your ring, as it were. What did the Elden Ring? I'm going to do a test recording. I mean, yeah, I might as well get that out of the way as well. Alright, so that works. Where's that low? Question is, what happens if I do this? That works as well. Got it. And I think you can. I think we're good. I think we can do this. Yeah, I'm going to get. I don't know. I can't promise anything when though. I'm going to try to get back to Elden Ring. But yeah, I've been non-stop working basically. Well, that's not true. But like I've not really like taken time off for myself recently, right? If I've worked a lot and then I've taken some time off of work and I've visited grandma and stuff like that. And I've spent some time with my wife and basically. I mean, that's free time, right? It's quality time, but it's not like me time. Maybe over the weekend I'll get back to Elden Ring. I really want to. I want to play it as well, but it's just been a thing. Anyway, let's stop whinging. Let's get some work done. Let's record this podcast, shall we? I'm just gonna kick this off and see how far we get. You're listening to the Private Citizen Defending Your Right to Have Something to Hide, your podcast for critical thinkers. This is episode 115 for Wednesday, the 27th of April, 2022. A second winter war? Hello everybody, my name is Fab. I'm coming to you live from Düsseldorf in Germany, where spring has sprung and the weather's getting better. And I've got a lot to do in all departments of my life. But hey, I'm back. I'm back to Wednesday release schedule. That's pretty good. The regular reschedule. And today, tonight, whatever time it is for you when you listen to this, we're gonna talk about Ukraine once again. I think I teased that in the last episode. We'll have to do a little bit of an update there. And if everything goes according to plan, I'll do another episode for you this week at some point. Because I still I owe you some episodes. And we got to talk about Elon Musk and Twitter. I feel that's an important topic. And my voice is already giving in, which is not a good sign. Like a minute into the podcast. I'm gonna have some Earl Grey, hot of course. And yeah, that's it. I'm back live. Back to the regular release schedule. I feel like that's pretty cool. So without further ado, let's get into the topic we want to talk about. Let's talk a little bit about Ukraine once again. Because I feel like that's where that's what everybody's talking about. That's it's not specifically where everything's happening, because I mean, as I talked about previously, the war has been going on for ages, and there's definitely other wars going on, but this is the important war. It's close to home when you're in Europe, I guess, yeah. So I think we should talk a little bit about what's been going on. If you go to the show notes, privatecitizen.press, I've produced a new map, which as I record this, I did this like last week, but not that much has changed, so we can kind of go by this map and have a look at what's been going on. So it basically looks like the Russian advance has stalled, and they've basically given up their push towards Kiev and evacuated all of that territory they had captured up north, and it looks like they're trying to consolidate the eastern the territory in the east, and with giving up the area around Kiev. We of course had the discovery of the what's been called the massacre in Bucha, where basically lots of civilians were killed. It looks like in the initial fighting, pretty much, and in the time that the Russian army had control of that area, I guess. Yeah, I'm not gonna go into that so much. That's obviously horrible. But I mean, on the other hand, that's kind of war, right? War is always horrible. I talked a little bit in previous episodes. I mean, if you go to the show notes, there's tags at the top, right? If you go to privatecitizen.press/episode/115, you get to this one, and there's like way at the top, there's tags, and there's like war in Ukraine is a good tag that has all the episodes. I would urge you to probably, if this is like the first one you're listening to on this topic, I kind of urge you to go back at least to episode 112, where I talk about kind of what I think Putin's war goals are for this war, and where you can also see the first map, like how the invasion was going initially. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this idea of a blitzkrieg, which I talked about back then, which people seem to bring up, which is the general accepted opinion that was the Russian idea. Cover as much territory as possible, and I already said that I don't think that was the case, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So I've looked at this quite a lot recently, and military tactics, and thought about what I think the Russians were doing. And a thing that comes up that a lot of people bring also up is like the similarities to the Winter War. So when the Soviet Union invaded Finland in the beginning of World War II, like this 39-40, it was like November 1939 till I think March 1940. Kind of a preemptive attack by the Soviet Union, trying to, the Finnish border is really close to, I mean, I talked about this in the beginning. What I feel like is like this Russian angst, with Moscow, but especially St. Petersburg, which used to be the capital, being very close to Europe, and in this case, Finland. If you look at a map, you see it's very close, and they were kind of trying to preemptively, I guess, push into Finland. So the Germans, I think Stalin was afraid that the Germans would invade Finland and then attack the Soviet Union through Finland. And so he basically invaded first, and we had the Winter War, and in which the very small and woefully under-equipped Finnish army had huge successes against a overpowered Red Army, right? And a badly prepared Red Army. There's some similarities here. I think the analysis of people's analysis of the similarities is pretty much right. I think most people are drawing the wrong conclusions from this, but we're going to get into that. So I want to talk about that a little bit. I want to talk about this idea of a blitzkrieg, of what that actually means, where the word comes from, why I don't think the Russians were doing that here, and why it's not a very Russian thing to do. Generally, it's not a typical Russian military doctrine. And then I want to kind of wrap it up and talk about what I think this all means for this war. And so my idea is that this is going to be, I'm going to do updates on the situation because it's obviously very important. It's politically very important when something develops, something significant, but I'm not going to do regular episodes on this. I think it's a very important topic. That's why I'm covering it, but I'm not going to make this the main topic of the show. This is not a history podcast, really. I mean, I like to talk about history, granted. It's a politics podcast, of course, and this influences politics. I'm going to talk about, it's gonna come up again and again, because it's just like the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, this war is a huge is the catalyst for political changes in Europe, or it's been also I think largely been used somewhat as an excuse to make political changes that the people in power and the people who can make political changes kind of want to make. I mean, there's huge energy politics involved here that we need to talk about. Sometimes even, things that are really far-fetched. There's oil it's being brought up a lot, like mineral oil. I'm not talking sunflower, the cooking oil, which is actually produced in Ukraine, and people are afraid that they're going to run out of. No, I'm talking car petrol stuff, which if we're talking gas, right? So the Russian gas reserves and selling gas to Europe, that is of course largely impacted by this, and I understand that. But petrol, oil really isn't because there's certainly some oil being sold by Russia, but the vast amounts of where we get our oil from is where the Americans fought the last two wars, not the Russians, I guess. So there's some weird things, just some political changes that people say are connected to this war. But I'm not going to talk about some other stuff. But I'm not going to talk about that today. But that's going to come up in the future. That's just a prediction from me about future topics. But to understand all of this, of course, we need to kind of understand this war, and it's been badly covered, I think, in the press. I've talked about that before. So let's get back to this idea. What I think the Russians were doing here. Okay, so if you the Winter War somewhat is a good comparison to, I think, the initial tactic that the Russians had. So if you look at a map of Europe, of Northern Europe, you see this thing that kind of looks like a penis with balls attached, where Norway and Sweden are the penis, and then Finland is somewhat like the balls, right? And then there's this eastern part of that kind of peninsula that Finland belongs to, which is part of Russia, right? And then you have St. Petersburg, formerly Leningrad, and you have the what's called the Karelian Isthmus, which is this land bridge, which is really what the Winter War was fought over, because that's what people were saying. The Germans, if they go through Denmark and Sweden and Finland, that's how they're going to attack the Soviet Union. That's just one way to attack it. And if you control the Karelian Isthmus, you control the port of Leningrad, which is really important for naval warfare, because of course the Baltic in World War II was very important. I mean, that's like with the with the German. I mean, that was the Russian fleet there, but it's also where the German submarines were kind of, basically launched, and this is why Germany invaded Norway. And of course, Germany being, because the Russians attacked first, later being kind of in an alliance with Finland against the Soviet Union. But like, so if you look at Finland and you look at the initial tactics that the Russians employed to attack Finland, what they were kind of doing, what their idea was, I think, was they were coming from the east, obviously, being Russia, attacking from the east, and they were kind of trying to traverse so they were kind of obviously gonna take the Karelian Isthmus. That was one idea, but then they also tried to cut the country. Finland being a relatively narrow country that goes from north to south. They were kind of gonna try to cut it in half in the kind of like the smallest area, the smallest part of the country. Because I mean, the northern part is even today is like way less, inhabited, and the southern part is where most of the people live. So they were gonna kind of cut the northern part off, kind of capture that, and then swing around. Cut the country in half, and then capture the northern part, and then swing around, and with concentrated force attack the southern part, and take over the whole country, basically. And they failed. They failed because the Russian army did not manage to even traverse half of the area they needed to cut the country in half. Now, if you look at the map of Ukraine and how Russia attacked that, it kind of feels like they tried the same thing here. It kind of feels like they tried, like in hindsight. I didn't like last time. I didn't really so much see that, but like with looking at the historical perspective of the Winter War, I think it's kind of was a catalyst for me to maybe understanding what the Russians were doing here. So Ukraine being a country that is largely, I mean, it's much bigger than Finland, of course, but it's like the largest expanse is east to west, right? So I think what they tried to they tried to cut the country apart in half from north to south. Obviously, they attacked in the east because that's where they, had the Donetsk, like the Luhansk Republic and the Donetsk, like that's where they already had like the separatists, and they had bases and soldiers there. But in the south, they held Crimea, and so they tried to attack from the north, from Belarusia towards Kiev, and then from the south. And I think they were trying to cut the country in half here as well. And kind of, I think they probably expected heavy resistance in the north towards Kiev. But I think they were hoping to like quickly traverse the south and then just, reach Kiev from both sides. And I think it's pretty clear. I mean, history will have to decide on this in the coming years. But it seems pretty clear to me that both in, like here in Ukraine, the Russians made the same mistake they made in Finland in the Winter War. Now, sorry, I need to have some, okay. I've been talking a lot today. Sorry, so my throat is a bit raw. So it is historically understood and well explained, like with evidence, that the Russians, when they invaded Finland, they thought the Finnish people would kind of, or a part of the Finnish people would see them as liberators, and they would they had like so the Finns, when they kind of destroyed like Russian military convoys and captured like the supply vehicles, they found like equipment for marching bands and flags and all this, like basically parade equipment, instead of like equipment for a long protracted war. And so they kind of figured out that, hey, okay, what the Russians thought they were gonna be, seen as liberators and just basically come in and don't have to fight much, maybe break a little bit of resistance, then like basically win over the hearts and minds of the people, and then it's on to parades in Helsinki, right? Which obviously was a huge miscalculation. I feel like in the Winter War it was a bit more understandable than today, because you got to remember these were communists, and the thing with kind of like the Nazis, kind of like all of these like extreme political factions, they tend to believe their own propaganda. Like, they smell their own farts too much or what. What's going on? I don't know, right? So the communists kind of, there was a civil war in Finland before this, kind of like in every European country. The communists tried to take over power, fighting, the Reds against the Whites, Reds being the communists, the Whites being the king, or in Germany it was like the Kaiser, what's the word? The emperor. So kind of like the monarch, the monarch faction. Those were the Whites, and the same in Russia. The Whites against the Reds in the revolution, and they were kind of hoping that the Finnish communists would support them, or at least I think the minimum hope from Stalin was that Finland, which at the time was like a lot of European countries politically divided, would fall apart politically, right? The communists always had this thing like that democracy is weak because there's all these competing factions and they're fighting in parliament all the time. And how can you get like a strong country when that's going? It's the same that's actually what the fascists and the communists have in common. That's what they always thought about democracy. So they thought like this is the Stalin probably thought this is gonna splinter, right? The political unity of Finland's going to splinter, and then we're going to come in and some people are going to see us as liberators, and then we're going to take over the country and liberate the workers, and everything's going to be fine. Now, that obviously didn't happen. What happened is when the Soviet Union attacked Finland, it unified all the political factions, and they were like, oh, the Russians are fucking attacking. We're going to, set aside our differences and fight them to the bone. And kind of the same thing, I think, the Russians made the same mistake twice, like 100 years later almost. They made the same mistake. I think it's kind of obvious. We also see now from some stuff that's been found in Ukraine, in Russian convoys, that they were kind of expecting the same thing. They were, kind of thought, I think, the east of Ukraine would see them as liberators and would welcome them with open arms, which is also why, lots of military analysts have said this now, which is why they were kind of lining up their tanks and their supply trains in a way where they were lining them up basically in hostile territory, but like tactically thinking they were safe because they thought they were in an area where people would not attack them. And that turned out to be a huge mistake. So that is why they had a lot of losses, kind of just like the Soviet army had a lot of losses in the Winter War. And then another parallel that I think is pretty clear is that there was bad preparation. There's this famous thing from the Winter War where so they captured like Russian, so the Finns are like capturing Russian military convoys, right? And then they find like marching band equipment, of course, and they're kind of laughing at that. But then there's also like this famous picture that's also I linked the Wikipedia article to the Winter War in the show notes, private citizen or press, if you want to read a bit more into this. There's this famous picture that I remember from school book, I think, where like there's like Finnish officers and they're sitting like in front of this the flags they captured, like this huge Stalin flag. And then they have a huge pile of skiing manuals, where the Russians brought skiing manuals. Which obviously, if you're attacking Finland in the winter, your soldiers, I mean, they're bringing skis, right? They should know how to ski, right? You can't expect that you can learn how to ski with a fucking manual in the middle of a war. So because they were kind of expecting to be welcomed, this led to other logistical errors and just preparation errors that their soldiers were just ill prepared. And we're seeing a lot with that in Ukraine now, apparently as well, where like Russian soldiers are just ill informed. They don't know what's going on there. They don't coordinate very well, which is something that happened in the Winter War as well. And they're just not well prepared because, you know, their commanders were aiming for a different situation, I think. And by the way, I find this hilarious, kind of like as far as you can find war hilarious, but I'm a historian, so we're quite sanguine about these things, and we sometimes find these things hilarious. That they kind of made the same mistake twice, especially when you think like, if you think about like militaries and their propaganda, the thing that always stands out, at least to me, if you're thinking about militaries that give this, I have this idea or perpetuate this idea of coming in as liberators and being seen as liberators. It's always like the Americans, right? It's the American army. They're always the liberators, and like that's what the propaganda always says, right? When they went into Iraq, like we're the liberators, and the Iraqi people are really seeing us as you know, the real Iraqi people, not like the thugs in like Saddam's corrupt criminal military, whatever that even means. Like the real people see us as liberators, and this obviously comes from World War II, where to some extent, you know, in Germany, you know, that was kind of true. Like a lot of Germans, like by the end of the war, saw the Americans as liberators. Also in contrast, because of the Russians, because the Russian army was behaving so horribly. But you never see the American army like smell their own farts, right? They have that as propaganda, but it doesn't infiltrate the minds of the military strategic like command. They're not like believing that, right? So the Americans were arming their they were defending their compounds in Iraq and Afghanistan, like even while they were saying we're really the liberators and the real people kind of are welcoming us. They knew that there was resistance, and they were not gonna like, you know, park their equipment somewhere where it could have been easily attacked, right? So they never fell for this kind of, you know, by hoping for having wishful thinking, really, which is something that usually politicians, you know, happens to politicians. But generally not to generals who plan an invasion. But I mean, the Russian army seems to be prone for this, and we have seen this now twice in 100 years with a very different army, right? I mean, the Soviet army in 1939 is very different from the Russian army in 2022. Ideologically, from the organizational structure. I mean, especially because the Soviet army, I mean, even if you see, which it is, like if you see the current Russian army as a continuation of the Red Army, the Soviet army changed massively, you know, in the 70s and 80s, and even during World War II. Like they also changed massively. Stalin had a huge reform of the army based on what he saw as a bad performance, especially in the first few months of the Winter War. So there seem to be similarities here, which I find interesting. As a historian, you always find like parallels like that very interesting, and I think that kind of explains why the Russians failed in the initial attack. I still think they weren't executing what people like to call a blitzkrieg here. Largely, I mean, first of all, the term blitzkrieg is like, I mean, it's a very placative term, and it works well in a Sabaton song, but it's not really a good military term. Like, if you military historian, I'm not, but you know, obviously as a historian, you always wars are very important because they're very important historic events, and so you know, I did a lot about the Third Reich and stuff, and something that I've just recently been I knew this, and I've read about this in university, but how it is, you kind of forget things, and then something comes up, and then you do more research, and then you kind of remember all these things. So it all came back to me like that in reading about this, that, the Blitzkrieg is not a military term. It is a journalist invented that term. I think pretty much Times Magazine popularized it. Of course, in response to the German attack on Poland and the invasion, and how quickly Germany managed to overthrow Poland. But it is important to state that the German army, which, the German army in the Third Reich, so Hitler's army, the Wehrmacht, is a pretty much direct continuation of the Prussian army, right? In the tradition of Frederick the Great, and the same army that Bismarck used to unify Germany by attacking Denmark and France and waging those wars. And the tactic that people like to call Blitzkrieg is more, if you want to use a more scientifically historical term, something that historic scientists use. In German, you call this, it's usually called Preußisch-Deutscher Bewegungskrieg, which loosely translates to Prussian-German, because, Germany is not only Prussia. And when we're talking about, the wars in 1870, 71, stuff like that, we're not talking, Germany didn't exist yet. It was founded after those wars. So that's why it's like, because, there was a Bavarian army, and there was a Saxon army, and, all these German kingdoms had all these armies, but like the Prussian mode of warfare, because Bismarck was Prussian, and because Prussia rose to prominence in Germany, and then that enabled the Prussians to kind of unify Germany, like their way of waging war basically took over and became the German way of waging war, which was the German army tried to use in World War I, which was not very successful, because World War I was a war that was not very conducive to this way of war, which I can get into a little bit. But then in World War II, it became the mode by which the Wehrmacht executed its invasions of other countries, which is where this term Blitzkrieg comes from. There's a historian called Robert M. Santino who calls this the German way of war. And basically the idea is generally that you have, and this started with, we're talking initially, the Prussian army, we're talking like cavalry, we're talking horses, but that then got transplanted to once tanks became, once tank warfare grew out of World War I, this mode of waging war got transplanted from horses to tanks. But basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to attack you have a front, right? You try to attack like a weak point in the front, preferably, with like a mass push. So you concentrate your forces, you try to punch through like the front in an area, like with concentrated force, and maybe by taking into account a lot of casualties. And then you punch through, and you have mobile forces that just with speed basically leave the front behind and capture, go behind the lines, go behind enemy territory. And then you're not doing like a front warfare, right? Where you're trying to push the front back against the enemy. You're trying to pinch holes into it and then surround the enemy, and then like create pockets where you can capture them. And so that's one aspect of it. It's like you're trying to be highly mobile. The other aspect is you try to force something which in German is called Vernichtungsschlacht, which is kind of like a decisive battle. You're trying to be very quick with this, quick and forceful, and you don't want to get into protracted wars. You kind of want to force the enemy to commit to a decisive battle, which hopefully you can win, right? Because you're faster and you're outmaneuvering the enemy. The idea is that, this is all something like, Clausewitz kind of came up with a lot of this. You kind of like trying to win like that decisive battle because you have the element of surprise on your side or whatever. And part of this is this type of warfare specifically that you recognize. This is something that Prussian politicians always recognized. Bismarck, when talking about war, always talked about like it's like a game of dice. It's like the ultimate dice throw. It's like very risky. You basically risk it for the biscuit, kind of is what you're trying to do. And with that, with accepting this comes a mode of warfare where you accept risk, and you're doing this, like you're punching through the front, and if you then see what you think is kind of an opportunity, you seize it. Even though you might not even like see through the situation completely, you're not stepping back, going grand strategy, going, oh, what does this lead to? You're like, we're moving, the tanks are moving, we see an opportunity and we seize that opportunity. We hope that like with basically what's the term I'm thinking of? Fate favors the bold, right? You're trying to kind of be bold and maybe even like rattle the enemy with that, like be quicker than them. You might not even have the decisive power advantage, but because you're seizing the opportunity, you might get them on the defensive and then like win by basically sheer force of willpower. Like if you, I like Sabaton, so I go back to like if you know the Sabaton song Ghost Division, by which they open almost every concert with it. That's about Rommel's Panzer Corps, right? And especially when they attacked France, they were termed the was it Geister? Was it Ghost Division? What's the German term? It's not Bataillon, is it? Oh my God, what were they named? What was the German nickname? Gespensterdivision. Ah, yes, the Ghost Division. Basically, because a lot of the time, the German military high command, the Wehrmacht, the Oberkommando, didn't even know where like fucking Rommel's division was, because he would like. So you have a plan. You're like, okay, we have this tank battalion, and your goal is like to capture that area, right? And he would attack that, and he would kind of see, oh, we're overwhelming those guys, and he would just keep going, even though that was not his his orders were not specifically that. But he saw like, I can capture 50 more kilometers today, and I'm just gonna do it. And they would just like seize the opportunity, even though like the supply train wasn't even like set up and everything. They would just risk it. Like if they'd run into opposition significant, then they would have been outmaneuvered. The opposition had better supplies. They would have lost that. But like especially in France, this kind of mode of warfare worked very well for the Germans. And so like the high command often didn't know where Rommel was, because he was already ahead. And like and this kind of mode of warfare is what enabled the successes that, especially in Poland, then got termed Blitzkrieg. It's a very risky way to wage war, right? There's huge casualties attached to this. And if you're risking it all the time, it can go wrong. And you can see it worked very well in Poland and in France, and it failed miserably in the Soviet Union. And this is a thing also I recently read. I think I talked about this in a previous episode, but like I read like a thing from a historian where it says you basically never know how wars are gonna, people always in the time frame when the war is going on, they always predict the wrong winner, right? So if you take World War II and if you take the German invasions, the one that was everybody predicted was Poland. Like everybody was like, yeah, Germany's gonna completely crush them. It's gonna be a fast war. That worked. But when Hitler tried to do the same with France, everybody said this is never gonna work. He's gonna lose this. This is a disaster. And everybody was surprised when suddenly the same kind of mode of attack again worked in France. And so people predicted that one wrong. When Hitler then invaded the Soviet Union, everybody, because they saw France, was like, okay, he's won against Poland. We kind of take that for granted. He fucking for some reason managed to just win against France very quickly. So he's going to win against the Russians. Their army's not as well equipped and stuff like that. As you know, it didn't work out that way. The Russians managed to actually blunt that assault long enough to then just with massive manpower gain the upper hand and, over years basically push the Germans back and basically win Second World War. I'm to this day, I'm very certain that, like, even without the American intervention and even without D-Day, the Russians alone would have won World War II. It would have probably taken a few more. There would have been a lot more casualties, and it would have taken a lot longer, and a lot more people would have died because, like, Hitler would have probably have gassed a lot more, Jewish people and all the other people he murdered, like gay people, homosexuals, handicapped people, all that stuff. But I think the Russians still would have won that. So what I'm trying to say here is that this way to wage war is a specifically very German way to wage war. And historically speaking, the Russian way to wage war has always been the exact opposite. The Russians, in World War II and earlier, the way they waged war was this front war. They would just push the front. They wouldn't, especially they wouldn't have these daring maneuvers. In the Soviet army, if you did something like Rommel and they didn't know where you were for like a week, you'd come back and you'd get shot probably. Like some commissar would probably shoot you because this is just not how the Soviet army worked. The Soviet army was like massed artillery, and then they would just bombard the area they wanted to capture, like for sometimes weeks, fucking destroy everything, and then move in with force, always with force, sometimes under horrendous casualties. The tank battle of Kursk is a very good example of this, where like the German side had a lot fewer tanks, better equipped tanks in strategic and tactical positions that were a lot better, and the Russians were just managed to just by just pure force. And that's where this tank doctrine, I talked about this in an early episode as well, of the Russians, where they just built more tanks, right? They just built 4 tanks for every Western tank, and they just completely assume that those tanks will get destroyed and the people inside them will horribly die. And they just calculate that. Like that was one of whenever I read about this in history, it's always one of the things that I abhor about communism, where I feel like communism was even like harsher towards its own people than even like Nazis and fascism, where even the Nazis, they kind of tried to keep their soldiers alive, where the Russians, they just didn't fucking care. When there was warfare, trench warfare, and didn't have enough rifles, they just gave every third man a rifle. And, it was just, it's just like a meat grinder. And the Russian armies always embraced this. So, and specifically because I think the current Russian army is like a continuation of all of that. There was no hard cut. Not like in Germany, where like the Wehrmacht it wasn't like a lot of Wehrmacht officers ended up in the Bundeswehr and stuff like that. But, there was a much harder cut and a much bigger change in military tradition than in Russia, where I guess there really wasn't any. So, like, I find it inconceivable that Putin all of a sudden, or his generals would go for, a Prussian-German maneuver war, as it's also called, right? Like this quick, this high risk, high reward way of quickly, and they're not kitted out for that either. Like they don't have the Soviet, the Soviet army, but like the Russian army is not built for that. It's like the equipment's not built for that. The unit structures are not built for that. And I don't think they so that massing the tanks and parking them in these, that is just not something you do when you wage this kind of war, right? They would have just thrown everything into the country as quickly as possible, which has its own problems. You know, you have problems with like supply lines and something the Wehrmacht always struggled with. But like they just didn't, their whole poise in this conflict doesn't look like that. I mean, for example, they have one of the big, like really surprising things for me, as somebody who's, you know, never was in the military, whose only knowledge about all of this stuff comes from studying history and playing strategy games. A huge surprise to me is that the Russians had massive, for this whole war, as far as I can tell, they've had massive aerial superiority. The Ukrainian Air Force is basically non-existent. Like after the first few days, it was basically non-existent. I mean, they have drones and stuff, and they have success with anti-air, and then, you know, they've gotten good weapons and stuff from the West, especially from the Americans, very good anti-air weapons, and they're good at like shooting down Russian planes. But the Russians have massive air superiority. They've never used this. Like they've never used this, you know, land, air, sea doctrine that the US military is basing all of their attacks on, right? If you look at all the wars since Vietnam that the US military has waged, like getting air superiority is like almost always the first step, right? If you look at the Kosovo War, they took out anti-air defenses, in some cases with like special ops and stuff like that, and then they had massive air superiority, and they just rode that to victory. Same with Iraq. You know, the one of the reasons they just basically won both of those wars was that. And the Russians, they have not capitalized on that. And that would be like one of the key factors if you were using some kind of like Prussian maneuver war tactics today. I feel. Right? You'd get air superiority first. I mean, even the Nazis in World War II did that. They recognized, you know, the power of an air force and of air superiority very early on. I mean, they always struggled having enough planes and stuff, but the Russians certainly don't have that problem. So, I don't know. It's all to me, it all looks like they were trying to just move in and be welcomed and didn't have a plan B. And obviously made massive mistakes there. And what they're doing now is more of a typical Russian warfare, right? They didn't try to do a blitzkrieg attack, failed, and now settle back to that this is plan B. I think that they never had a plan B. They tried to just march in, like in the Winter War. That failed, and now they're just doing what they always do, which is kind of their plan B now. But I don't think they planned that, because their whole poise of the attack was also not set up to go to plan B, which is, you know, which they're doing now, which is, you know, the massive bombardment. This is why they're bombarding cities like Mariupol and just destroying it completely, trying to just massively destroy any opposition with, you know, massed attacks and just ignoring casualties. Obviously, another parallel to the Winter was just the like, for example, the tank tactics, where of course in the Winter War they didn't have drones, but you know, they can't get off the roads pretty much in Ukraine because of the conditions of the mud and stuff, which the Russian army should have foreseen, really. But obviously didn't. Like the tires, you know, on some trucks, the tires didn't have enough maintenance, so obviously they didn't see that. And the same happened in the Winter War. There wasn't mud, there was just trees. Like in the Winter War, the Russian armored vehicles couldn't get off the roads because the Finnish trees are so thick that you just can't go, you know, driving the tanks through the forests. So the Finnish were just sitting in the forest on the side of the road and attacking Russian convoys, pretty much like the Ukrainians are doing now with drones, where you basically you have a convoy, you attack the tank in the front, or I think you start in the back actually, you attack this tank in the back, then you blow up a tank in the front, then the whole column can't move, they can't get out of the way because they can't get into the trees, and then you cut them. I think there's like a word for it, like a Finnish word where it's like cutting wood or something. You kind of cut the convoy into little pieces and then you attack them piecemeal. You like basically get stuck in, make just basically keep shooting on them so that they can't consolidate and can't, turn this into a real defensive position. And then you cut them apart, and then you have one big group, because the Finnish they never had enough soldiers. They have one concentrated group, and that just goes and kills these little individual pockets, and by that you can destroy a largely superior force with a smaller force by just being smart and using the environment. And the Russians were not prepared for this. They were not good at, in the Winter War, to communicate. The same seems to be the reason in Ukraine, and they've seen to largely, I think, with we're giving up on our attack on the north, on Kiev. I think they recognize that, and now they're just settling in for a very long protracted war in the east, where they just slowly push the front forward like the Russian army always does. Now we get to the point where I think people misanalyze the Winter War. So people who haven't looked at this in detail, I think see the Winter War as the Soviet Union tried to attack Finland, which was much smaller military, much less prepared, and they, by being smart and willpower and just being tough as nails, won against the Soviet army. Now, that's not true. They didn't win. What they did is they fought the Soviet Union into a settlement, right? They fought long enough so that the government could get a peace settlement, which wasn't too bad for Finland. It wasn't good. They gave up territory, but they basically held out so long to get this peace treaty on terms that were as good as, the president of Finland, when he signed this, was I think he said something like, if I sign this, my hand's gonna just rot off or something like that, because he just fucking hated signing that. But it was a very favorable terms, especially for such a small country that realistically had no chance to win against the Soviet army, which is what Mannerheim, the commander of the Finnish army, the Cross of Mannerheim is named after him, famous Finnish war hero, said from the beginning. He said, we don't have any chance. Basically, what the Finnish did in the Winter War was bluff. Mannerheim had he used not propaganda. That's what is happening now in Ukraine. He used kind of the absence of propaganda to kind of bluff the Russians. He had propaganda things like the Mannerheim line, right? And holding the Mannerheim line, and there were several lines. But basically what they did. So if you look at the end of the Winter War, historians today estimate that had the peace treaty not been signed, the Finnish army would have collapsed inside of 3 weeks. And what Mannerheim did was, by inflicting horrendous losses on his own forces, he fooled the Russians into thinking that the Finnish army would break. And Stalin bought that. And Stalin was like, I'm losing. The Russians lost a lot of equipment. They lost a lot of men. I think another parallel is that by the end of the Winter War, Finland had more tanks than it started the war with, because they captured so many Russian tanks, kind of like the Ukrainians are doing right now. They had some successes, but they were losing, and they were a much smaller army. And the Russian losses didn't really matter, because Russia had just such a bigger army, and they could have held on much longer. And had Stalin known that he was so close to winning, he would have just, I think, easily committed however many thousand men would have had to die, however many hundreds of tanks would have been destroyed, people without skis that are just crawling to the snow. He wouldn't have cared. But because Mannerheim prevented very smartly, especially prevented journalists from figuring out what was going on, and foreign journalists from going into Finland and, going to the front and figuring out, hey, looking at the morale that was getting low, how many soldiers the Finnish were losing, how many equipment they were losing. Had that been reported, the Russians would have figured out very quickly that Finland couldn't have won this, and wasn't really holding out, was just Mannheim was just bluffing, basically, and the settlement would have never happened, and Stalin would have just completely invaded Finland. And if you know that, and if you transplant that on Ukraine today, which is a very different kind of war, because basically what we're happening now, the Winter War, the Finnish could bluff the Russians because there was no, I mean, there was propaganda, but there was no reporting. There was no smartphone footage from the front, which we have now. Ukraine is very different. Ukraine is a propaganda war where the Ukrainians are doing a fantastic job of convincing the world that they're winning, even though they're not and they can't. But, every little victory, we've destroyed this tank. Look at this tank, it's being towed by a tractor. Look at this cute girl. She's been fighting the Russian invaders for like 8 years, and she and her boyfriend are riding around in this armored car that they built themselves, and they're shooting Russians in the face. Look at how good we are using these fucking N-laws we got from the Americans or whatever. They're doing a very good job in this propaganda one. The Russians are doing a very bad job. But I think that's because the Russians don't need it. They don't need propaganda. I think Putin knows that he's a pariah now forever. And the Russians will be a pariah state to the West, to everybody, for ages now. So he knows that. So he doesn't care. He doesn't care about he doesn't need the propaganda. He just needs it towards his own people, right? He just needs to hold his regime up because he knows that the army will stand, because the Russian army and the fucking, I don't know, either patriotic, corrupt, or he'll get shot if you do the wrong thing. So he knows that probably that he thinks that his regime is strong enough and he can hold this, and what the world thinks, he doesn't care. Whereas Ukraine is doing a great job. Another difference here is that the Finns didn't get any international help, right? Everybody was thoughts and prayers for Finland, but okay, it's just Finland. We got bigger fish to fry. The Germans are waging a war. They're more of a problem. Whereas, the Ukrainians actually get lots of support. Soldiers, massive equipment. But that doesn't change the fact that what we're not seeing, because they're winning the propaganda battle, is the same thing that must be happening to the Ukrainian army right now that was happening to the Finnish army. It doesn't matter how many men the Russians lose, they have the bigger army. And the Ukrainians are losing men every day as well. Just like the Finnish, we're losing people every day. And I don't think Putin's going to fall for the same thing that Stalin fell for. Because, while there's propaganda, and you and me, if we're reading our media, you might be in the UK, might be reading the BBC, I'm reading Tagesschau, whatever. You're in the US, you're reading CNN or seeing CNN, whatever. That's what you're getting. That's what you're inundated with. And you might, probably not, if you listen to this show, you're probably not believing that. And you probably heard me mention Bernays enough that you go okay, that's obvious propaganda. And, especially in wartime, I'm not believing anything. All of this is skewed in some way. But we might believe this because we're inundated with this, and the Ukrainians are doing an exemplary job in wartime propaganda here. First of all, Putin doesn't care. Secondly, he's probably got better information sources, right? Anybody with a intelligence service, the GRU or whatever, or the NSA, the GCHQ, they have satellites. They know exactly what's going on, right? He probably knows very well what the situation is like, and he'll be focusing on that. And that's something they didn't have, obviously, in 1939 in the Winter War. And Stalin didn't have that. Right? So back in the day, you could kind of, the Russians would attack the Mannheim line and then fail, and the Russian commanders would get the idea that the Finnish were kind of unshakable, even though they weren't. Today you can see behind the lines, and you can see that their equipment is running out and their bullets are running out. So I don't think that's going to be the same outcome. I think, as I said before, if there's not going to be regime change, if there's no change within Russia, and God beware, I hope NATO is not so stupid to start World War III over this. If that's not happening either, then I think the Russians will probably not, they're not capture the whole country, I guess, but they're like, slowly advance that front as long as they want to and as long as they're willing to pay the price in equipment and manpower. And the propaganda stuff is not gonna change that significantly, I think. I mean, they're making a lot of mistakes, just like, the big thing in the Winter War was that the Russians, had they, for example, used the Prussian maneuver warfare, they actually broke through the Mannerheim line in many, many, many places, but failed to capitalize because the Russian army doesn't work like that, right? The German army, the Prussian army, or the Wehrmacht would have gone, we're broken through, and the individual commanders had enough leeway in their decisions that they could have gone okay, we're seizing this opportunity and we're punching through and we're breaking this line and we're taking it apart. Whereas the Russians, when they punch through that hole, they stop. And the general's I can't, or the colonel, whoever's in command, basically needs to start talking to Moscow to ask Stalin in person in some cases if they were allowed to fucking break through. And by the time they got whatever commissar for military affairs somewhere else was going to sign off on this, by the time they got that, the opportunity was long gone and the Finnish had regrouped. And that is why the Russians also didn't have, basically lost a lot of opportunities in the Winter War. I think you can see signs of this in this conflict as well. And I think they're probably still operating in the same way. But in the end, the way the Russian army works, and they just kind of plow everything down, it doesn't really matter. It's a very inhumane way to wage war, of course. Both against, towards your own soldiers as well as, civilians and other people. That's kind of why stuff I think stuff like Bucha happens, because, they occupy a town and then there's civilians there, but they're in a situation where basically Ukraine has handed out AK-74s to everybody who could grab one, and they're the government is actively advocating guerrilla warfare, and you're a Russian soldier sitting on some armored vehicle, and the guy steps out in the street because he was sitting in a basement for 2 weeks and is dying of thirst and needs to go out, and they just mow them down because they're we don't know what's happening here. They don't want to attack us. That's why, they're using fucking flechettes, ammunition and stuff like that, because the Russian way of warfare, largely, I think, owing to the Stalin regime and the communists and how they, it wasn't only Stalin, and this is how Lenin thought about these things as well. Even Trotsky, it was very inhumane. And it's very different than, let's say, the American army. I've talked about how I think the invasion of Iraq, the last one, by the US military was as illegal, if you want to call it that, which I think is stupid, as this invasion. But it was a very different way to wage war, right? It wasn't as ruthless, and for the for the simple fact also that I think there's two differences. The U.S. Army or the U.S. military was always very concerned about their soldiers and their equipment, first of all, and they've got a reputation to uphold, right? They have propaganda to uphold. They can't just go willy-nilly shoot civilians because they uphold this myth that they're the good guys, which I personally find ludicrous because it's war and you're shooting people. So you're by definition a bad guy. You're a murderer. You're meditating to kill somebody. In any other context, you would be a murderer and in jail and a bad person. But I've talked about this last episode. But so everybody's the bad guys, but like they have this reputation to uphold, which the Russians just don't. They don't give a fuck. I think their military leadership. I think Putin doesn't. They know that they are now the pariah, and they will never get this back, and they don't care. For them, this is just a political tool. And I don't know about the individual soldiers, what they think. I couldn't begin to guess. But yeah, so that's what I think. I think the outcome pretty much. I mean, I've thought a lot about this a lot more since I last talked about this. But I think I'm still with the same kind of outcome, right? I think this will just go on for years, unless something happens. And I think that change is pretty much only going to come from inside Russia. I'm not ruling out that like sanctions and just international pressure will eventually force this, but it's got to come from within, right? It's got to basically, it's not like NATO's going to make worse sanctions, then Putin's gonna say, no, this is too bad. I'm gonna stop this, right? Basically the situation within Russia has got to be so bad that like he loses support. But I think that might be a matter of centuries. Like if you look at decades, sorry, certainly not centuries, no, decades. If you look at how long it like took, I talked about this before, in the Vietnam War, in a much more open democratic society, for like the people saying we don't want this war, to get the minority and finally actually force enough change politically that the war would be stopped. How long that took, and if you look at how long I mean, this was the Cold War, but like how bad it needed to get for the population of the Soviet Union for that to fall apart, right? To crack basically in Eastern Germany, and people, I mean, as soon as somebody started going, we're not gonna have this, this is shit. Like it kicked off this whole avalanche of everybody doing that, and then the Soviet Union was history. But like, to get to that point, to build up all that snow so that the avalanche could start, basically, to stay within the metaphor, it took ages, took decades. So I have a very bad feeling about this. I think this is gonna take a lot longer than a lot of people think. On the other hand, that is as bad as that is for anybody who's in the Russian army or anybody who's in Ukraine. I think it's vastly preferable to the alternative, which I think is open warfare in some way. I don't know if the Germans are crazy enough to actually send tanks, and I'm not talking about the mobile anti-aircraft platforms that the German news thinks is a tank. I'm talking main battle tanks. I'm talking Leopard 2. Right, if they're not doing that, which would be a mass mistake, or NATO doing something really stupid, I think that would be much worse. That would just escalate everything. It would massively escalate. I mean, this was, even if we not have a nuclear war, it would escalate through all of Europe. The other countries would get it. It would be a massive disaster. Right? I think it would spiral out of control to World War III, and I don't think we want that. I think that would be even worse. But yeah, it's. I think this war. I mean, the other way this war could end would be like a ceasefire and a treaty where Ukraine. I've talked about this before as well, where Ukraine gives up some of their territory. Although I think that is, again, in comparison to the Winter War, it's a lot less likely. I think the Ukrainian political climate, Zelensky and their government and the support that they have makes that a lot less likely. Also due to the propaganda, because I mean that is a definite effect of the propaganda that it's having not only outside the country but also inside the country. And also, I think also, notwithstanding the propaganda, I think there's a very big nationalist movement inside Ukraine that was there even before the initial, 8 years ago, the initial start of the war and invasion. I think that was there even before that. Yeah. Another factor that's maybe a bit of a change is, I think, if a bit of a contrast to the Winter War also, as the last point I'm going to get into just occurred to me, is that I think, I mean, the Finnish army was woefully unprepared for this war, and they acquitted themselves. One of the kind of like miracles of the Winter War is like how well the Finnish army managed to fight this war, even though they were so unprepared and badly trained and in some cases. But they did that very well. Whereas the Ukrainian army is, I didn't know this either, but it makes complete sense. And I read a lot about the Ukrainian army in the last 2 months. Is a lot more prepared, which makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because this war's been going on for 8 years. They got their ass handed to them in 2014 by the Russians, at which point they completely changed the whole army. Like, they completely overhauled the whole army, the way how they do things, and they prepared, and they were much better prepared. I think they were still unprepared for this invasion happening at this very point in time, but once that happened, they could definitely, reach for a much better prepared corps of officers and soldiers than they had 8 years earlier, because they used those 8 years for training and stuff like that. So that might also have been a factor why the Russian plan didn't go. But I think the general point was just the Russians, for some reason that I will never understand, because my whole life is basically being opposed to propaganda. They just believed that the Ukrainians would it was almost like a parallel universe kind of thing, where they thought they lived in a universe where the Ukrainians would welcome them after 8 years of already being in the war, which is, to me, is not understandable. It just no. I mean, I don't know that much about Ukrainians and the way they think about their country. I've admitted this before, but like in any case, that is just like, if you like, I don't know, you're waging a low level war for 8 years, and you've kind of stealthily, but obviously invaded parts of a country. I don't know. I mean, the Germans, the Germans are the most unnationalistic people probably now these days, because of just the whole training in schools and stuff. The whole reaction to fascism and the Nazis. But like, if the French went across the border and took part of the Ruhr area, and pretended there was like a referendum, whatever, but basically sending soldiers in that were speaking French, but just not have a French flag on the uniform, and that was going on for 8 years. I think even like the German public would like rally behind like their army, and when the French then invaded, nobody would have thought, oh well, we'll welcome the French. Like, they'll just carry warm baguettes over the border, and we're like, yeah, French food's so much better than German food anyway, just come in. I feel I don't understand where they were coming from. Anyway, so that's my take. That I'm gonna leave it at that, unless something really interesting happens in this war. I think this is gonna be low level like this now for years. But we'll see. As that historian said, nobody ever predicts wars correctly, basically. So who knows? The Ukrainian could just like win this. That would be an amazing Sabaton song, by the way. Okay, let's move on then. Let's talk a little bit about feedback. We haven't done that last episode, so it's about time. I got some feedback, so let's get into that. Steve B, who was responding on the forum to episode 113, Lex Draconis. This was the last episode about Drachenlord, the German YouTuber. And I was talking in the episode about the defense of his lawyer, who said, the guy basically told everybody, if you come to my house, I'm going to hit you in the face. And if people then turn up, they can't basically object if he hits them in the face. So that's how he got off at least one charge of aggravated assault. To which Steve B said, well, I'm not a lawyer, neither am I, and only ever been in Germany on vacation, but I can understand that. It's not like he said he would go to their house and hurt them. He actually warned them that if they invaded his space, he would potentially hurt them. That put the invader in control of whether they would potentially get hurt or not. So if they showed up at his house, they were already pre-warned, and it sounds like the event went down as advertised. True, but I'm not a lawyer, but generally I don't know how. I think Steve is from Canada, if I remember correctly. I don't know how laws work in Canada, but in Germany, the fact that you are pre-warned of something, or that somebody announces that they will commit a crime against you, doesn't help them off the crime. Like, that doesn't help them get off. The operative point is, did they commit a crime or not? If I will live in Düsseldorf, people in Düsseldorf are horrendous drivers, and they're very, very quick to anger. So if I have a altercation on the road with somebody, and I step out of my car, and the guy steps out of his car, and we yell at each other, and I say, if you don't shut up, I'm going to take my flashlight, I'm going to hit you over the head, which is what Drachenlord did. He hit somebody with a flashlight. And then the guy, if you come and touch me, then I'm going to hit you with a flashlight. And then the guy comes and just pushes me away, and I hit him over the head with a flashlight. That is aggravated assault. Like, the fact that I told him I would do this, or the fact that he was in control and he kind of caused it, doesn't matter. Attacking somebody with the intent of doing serious harm to them is like assault, and that's a crime. There are, and we're going to get into that because Steve's feedback is not complete. There are circumstances where you will get off that. But it's always like, you committed this crime, and then, obviously, like anything in law, the judge will go, well, we're going to have to weigh that against what else happens. So, for example, if somebody breaks into my home with a gun, and I happen to have a heavy flashlight in my hand, and he points the gun at me, and I just take my flashlight to defend myself and hit him over the head, then hitting him over the head is still assault. But the judge will probably say I was right to defend myself. But for example, in Germany, and this is something that Drachenlord was confronted with in his first conviction, which was years ago, where the judge said it's only self-defense if your life is in danger, right? Because in Germany we have the expectation. I know this is very different in the US, certainly, but in Germany we have Gewaltmonopol des Staates, the violence monopoly of the state. I don't know what the legal term would be in English. It means that, only the state is allowed to use force if necessary. So the expectation from the state towards me, if somebody threatens me in my home, I should call the police, and then the police sorts it out. Now, if the police doesn't get there in time and the guy threatens my life, I can defend myself, but only if he threatens my life, right? So if somebody breaks into my flat and starts smashing my furniture, and then I call the police, and I can't just hurt them, right? The police has to arrest him. If he's not threatening my life, then I'm not supposed to hurt them. Now, there are cases where, you could do that, and then you're in front of the judge, and you go for example, me, I've never got in trouble with the law. I would say, but the guy was smashing up my furniture. I was fearing for my and my wife's life, and I had to do something. Then the judge would probably, especially if the guy is known for breaking and entering, right? I would probably, if I like dressed properly in court and acquitted myself, unlike a Drachenlord, like a respectable person, I would probably get off. Like the judge would probably say, yes, in this case, you probably committed a crime, but in this situation, it's understandable. But they would warn me, right? They would say, you were not allowed to do this. You should not do this. You have to wait for the police. And this is what they told Drachenlord again and again and again. The police turn up there and they said, we know that it's a problem. We know that people are like harassing you, but you can't just defend yourself. They're not threatening your life. Anyway, Steve goes on. But full disclosure, I actually think that people should have the right to some form of defense of their house. For me, a person's house is sacred. I'm sure not going to someone's house to intimidate them, and won't actually go in a person's house unless I know them rather well. And due to previous events, I have a nice camera outside that records. So if an unwanted person does show up, I have nice evidence video of how the events unfold. I've actually had to use that before, and it worked great. Well, I agree with you with all that. I also think people's house is sacred. That's actually the German constitution says that. That's mostly defending me against the state, but the spirit is there, and it's the same if somebody breaks and enters. It's legally understood that it's my house, and I can actually to some degree defend it, but I'm only supposed to do that if my life is threatened. And it's the police job to do that. Also, obviously for privacy reasons, in Germany it's a bit difficult to put up a camera and stuff. But generally you don't really need that, because as I said before, if somebody breaks into your home, if there's a court case, like even if I hurt them and like I get indicted for a crime, and that crime is then being the breaking and entering would be another suit, another legal court case. But like in my court case, where it's about having hurt the person who broke into my house, it's not like generally I would kind of have to prove why. It's kind of obvious. It's my home. Somebody broke in. They have no right to break in. So like the law is already like pretty much against them. So I don't feel like I need that. In the whole Drachenlord situation, yes, the police needed like 40 minutes to get there. But that's like the thing I was saying. That's because he lived in the fucking middle of nowhere in Bavaria, right? If he could have, as I said before, he could have solved this very problem by just moving to Hamburg or Düsseldorf, where I live now. Like if a situation like that unfolded right here where I live, and people would be like lining up in the street to throw shit at my house. Like the nearest police station is literally 2 minutes away, but on foot. And there's a, much higher police presence here than in a small Bavarian village, and they are very much more forceful with situations like this. They don't take any shit, and you could see that when Drachenlord actually, his girlfriend. I don't know if she's still his current girlfriend. We don't really know that. But she was from Düsseldorf, which is in the rural area, which is close to where I am. And when he actually called the police there, they immediately closed the complete road where she lives, threw everybody who doesn't live there off the road, and he actually gave him a police escort for as long as so nobody could follow him, right? Because if you're in an actual like big city, where the police has the resources, and they have like basically, I don't know why in Bavaria, in a small town like this, people just take for granted that this happens, and it turns everybody's life into shit. Like in where I live here, people would not accept that, right? They would go like, there's people gathering in the street every day, and people can't sleep, and it's like, it's hell for them. Why the fuck isn't the police doing anything about this? Why the fuck isn't like the government doing anything about this? And the local government, right? The city council, whatever. And like even in Düsseldorf, they're a lot more laissez-faire than in Hamburg. Like in Hamburg, if you do something like this, they're gonna come with the big water cannon truck, and they're just gonna blast you off the sidewalk. I mean, for historical reasons, because the militant left demolishes certain parts of Hamburg actually May Day. because coming up, they always demolish like whole streets. They are well prepared for a situation like this, and they will not, like, they don't care. Like, they don't care if they're Nazis or militant left or Drachenlord hater. They just would not take that shit. Small update in the Drachenlord situation, by the way. He's lost his driver's license now. So he doesn't have a home. He can't drive his car around anymore because he's lost his driver's license. There's something called MPU in German, medizinisch-psychologische Untersuchung, a medical psychological evaluation. We also call it Idiotentest, the idiot test, colloquially. It's something, if you do something, it doesn't even have to be on the road. It's also like with certain crimes that you commit. The driving authority will basically say that they'll send you a letter and then go like, we have, because of these reasons, that court case or this happened, we have, or if you just keep drink driving or stuff like that, right? If you, we have this point system, and if you get too many points for drink driving, for speeding, whatever, eventually they will do that too. And if you get a driver's license in Germany, your instructor will say, whatever you do, never get an MPU, it's horrible. So they will send you a letter and they go like, we have reason to believe that you're not fit to operate a vehicle, so we will take your driver's license unless you submit to an MPU. And you actually have to go there and get an appointment, and this is like companies and government agencies who do this, or like half government agencies, I don't know. You go there and they basically evaluate you. They look at, medical, if you actually medically fit to drive, look at your eyesight and everything. And if you're using drugs, they take blood screenings, stuff like that. And then they have a psychological session with you where they evaluate, like, if you've been drinking and driving, they kind of have to demonstrate that you actually want to change and you're not doing that anymore. And then there's like a reaction test on the computer. Now the problem with that is, so the government sent, like the authorities sent Drachenlord the request to submit to an MPU. The problem is you can only get an MPU in Germany if you have a postal address, if you live somewhere. In Germany you have to be registered with the government where you live. It's a very peculiar system. And because Drachenlord doesn't have a home, he doesn't have that. So now he cannot get his driver's license back because he can't get the MPU. So now he doesn't have a car and he doesn't have a home. So fuck knows what he's doing now. I'm still maintaining that maybe going to jail would have been better for him. He could have, if I was him, I was probably like the German legal system can have so much leeway. Like, he could have just gotten like, I've got psychological problems, right? And then just presented like his streams where he's like banging his blow up doll and like uploaded that to the internet. He could have just like shown that in court and go like, I have problems. I can't go to jail. Like, I need psychological. And they would have probably sorted him out. There's this thing in Germany where you actually don't go to jail, especially with offenses that are not that bad, like what he got. And then you'd be like in that case, there's bad cases where they actually lock you up, where it's basically like jail, except it's not jail, it's a mental institution. But there's also the thing where they don't lock you up. There's the thing where you like, okay, he doesn't have a home, but where you at home, but you're like every day you go to this institution. And they basically, instead of jail, try to sort you out, which I think is a good thing. Like in Germany, we try to not punish people by putting them in jail. We're trying to get them back on the right path. It doesn't always work. Obviously, it doesn't work in a lot of cases, but generally it works. It would have probably been better for him. I don't know. Anyway, we got some more feedback. Another producer suggested that I should look at because I'm interested into history, which if you listen to this whole show, suggested that I look into the differences in foreign relations today between Russia and Germany today and exactly 100 years ago, when in 1922 the Treaty of Rapalje was signed, which is a famous document where basically the the Weimar Republic, the first German democratic state, and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression and friendship treaty, and had established very cordial foreign relations pretty much until Hitler attacked the Soviet Union. And he was saying he was listening to a podcast that talked about this, and I think this is an interesting idea. If I can get to it, I might actually do an episode on this. And I did I read a lot about the Treaty of Rapalje, obviously, in university, but my God, that is also 20 years ago now, almost. So it's been a long road getting from here to there. So yeah, I'm gonna have to read back into this, but it sounds like a very interesting idea, and it's one of the things I like when listeners become producers and suggest things like this. And you don't even have to put your name to it. Just write me. Go to privatecitizen.press. Details are all there in the show notes. And with that, we're gonna get to something else important that the producers do for this show. Which is tossing a coin to a podcaster, which is me. If you like this, if you get something out of what I'm doing here, consider supporting it. You don't have to. I'm not saying this. I'm serious about this, by the way, right? I'm not just saying this. I don't do this to give you like a bad feeling or anything. You don't have to support the show. I mean, you can support it by writing in, by signing up to the forum. I mean, it's totally awesome if you just sign up to the forum. Go, I really enjoyed this episode, or I like what you're doing. That's completely enough. But also, I need to put food on the table, and as you can tell, I'm just working my ass off currently, just trying to make some money, because I don't know. I don't know how is it going where you are, but like inflation in Germany is rampant. Pretty much everything's like 10% more expensive than it was a few months ago. That's not even counting like petrol, stuff like that, because I mean, we're not as good as we're shit. Like the war's happening and our economy goes to shit. This is just Germany, whereas like the American economy is like, oh yeah, we basically live off war. We're just fucked. So what I'm trying to say is, if you want to pitch in, every little bit helps. I got a Patreon, which is like a thing you can sign up, and then you can support me monthly, or you can also send money to producers at Fab Industries. How did George W. Bush say back in the day? No Agenda has a great clip of this. Don't send blankets or water. Just send cash. Just send cash. I don't need blankets or water. I need cash. Yes. Or, use PayPal. Which, Elon Musk, we're going to talk about him next episode, I guess. That's the value for value model. Thanks to the No Agenda show for, coming up with that. It's basically listener-supported content, which is, I think, is the only way forward. Is the only way. That is the only way to like even begin fighting all this rampant propaganda that's happening. Right, and then I would like to thank everybody who pitched in and who helped out and is helping me pay the bills. So thanks to Georges, Steve Hose, Butterbeans, Rodane the Insane, Michael Small, Jonathan M. Heavy, Michael Mullen Jensen, Dave 1I11G, Jaroslav Lichtblau, Jackie Plage, Philipp Klostermann, IKN, Bennett Piata, Sandman 616, Tobias, Vlad, Mode 7, Kai Sears, Joe Poser, Rizal, Fadi Mansour, Dirk Didi, Avis, Dick Potter, Mika, Mr. Ramish, Cam, Dave Umrish, Ricky M, Barry Williams, Jonathan, RJ Tracy, Rick Bragg, Captain Egghead, Astral C, Robert Forster, Super User, D, No Reply, and Crunkle. Thanks to all of you. And also thanks to my Twitch subscribers, because I stream this live on Twitch while I record it. I think it's kind of cool. Ever since I did a show called Linux Outlaws, people have been asking for this kind of thing. Kind of like it. I guess they kind of like... I think it's also kind of cool I mean, podcasts are already good because unless, when I write something, lots of people misunderstand me a lot of the time. I feel like if they actually get down to like downloading a podcast and listening to my voice while I talk about this, most of these misunderstandings go away because they hear my tone of voice when I'm talking about like what I feel about war, and then they're not like, oh, he's a cold-hearted bastard. No, they like, oh yeah, that's just like his way of dealing with it, being analytic or whatever. And it's probably even better if you see my face. So if you want to do that, you can go to Twitch while I stream this. I would love to have a schedule for this kind of thing, but due to my work, which the good side about being a freelancer is you can just take a day off and ride around on the motorbike, which is great right now, or play a video game. The downside is it's just you can't really plan with a lot of the work you're getting. So I don't have a schedule. But anyway, details for that, obviously, Twitch is in every episode. Private Citizen Press. But I would like to thank my Twitch subscribers who are supporting this. Some of them with Jeff Bezos bucks, because if you have Amazon Prime, you can subscribe for free. So thanks to Mike the Dane, Jonathan MH_com, Galtaran, Alterestris Jim, MTE Sorrow, Redeemer F, Bacon the Pork, and Mode 7 is unavailable. And then I also have to thank Bytemark at bytemark.co.uk. They're an amazing British cloud hosting company that have been basically, back in Linux Outlaws days, they gave me 2 servers, and I've been using them ever since to send these audio files to you. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to podcast. So thanks to Bytemark. They're great. I can only recommend them if you're looking for cloud hosting. They're awesome. And that's it for me for this episode. Obviously, the theme song for this show is called Acoustic Roots by Ru Kabzali. And I'm going to play us out now with a song that is called, Hacienda by Jet Averill. I have a license for Epidemic Sound, aptly named Epidemic Sound. And I just, browse around there for songs I like, and I really like this. By the way, they also have good play. If you like these songs, they're all on Spotify and on other music streaming services. I just use Spotify, so you can find all of that. They have cool playlists if you search for Epidemic Sound there. So yeah, this is Jet Averill with Hacienda, and I'll see you soon. Probably with an episode about Elon Musk. Aim to misbehave. love this song. It's a good song. There's some good music on it. I mean, especially like without vocals that you can use for like podcasts and videos. Some good stuff. Anyway, yeah, I'm gonna finish this show now. I'm gonna leave you. I'm gonna edit this podcast, get it out, and then I'm gonna go to bed because I haven't slept a lot tonight. I'm gonna get up early tomorrow for more work. I'm gonna rate you over to Pep now. Pep is a streamer, I think from the UK. Really funny dude. He's has a banana theme going on, which is, I guess, why his followers are called the Potassium Elite. I really enjoy him. He's a cool dude. It's fun to watch. He's playing Hunt Showdown right now, which is a game I never could get into, but a lot of people really like. So we're going to rate Pep, and I'm going to be back on Twitch. I'm going to try for like Friday or Saturday and play some Elden Ring, and also stream that Elon Musk episode, but I have no idea when. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it a lot. See you soon, I hope.